Thank you very much, Sound. It's precisely 7:15. It's the coffee hour. And we have Shakeeb Nazeer with us, who is the Web3 manager for Brands for Less Group. He's down from UAE and here to give us a better idea as to what Web3 does. So talk a little bit more about that. But before that, a very good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Very good morning to you as well and to all the listeners.
So I introduced you as the Web3 manager for Brands for Less Group. So can you give us an elaborate answer as to what this is?
Yeah, for sure. So, just a bit about Brands for Less first. So, Brands for Less is, I would say, the largest off-price retailer in the Middle East or MENA region. So, that has nothing to do with Web3, of course. But Web3, you could say it's kind of the next generation of the internet. We have lived through two generations of the internet, or two eras, right? So the first era was where the information was democratized. So in the sense, you could access all sorts of information from the internet, but you could not own anything, or you could not contribute to it. So the second generation was the rise of social media and user-generated content. So that's where you saw brands like Facebook, YouTube, or even TikTok, all of these kind of platforms arise. But the ownership was centralized, so there was not much control for the user. They say when the user doesn't pay for a service, you are the product, right? So the next generation is kind of a hybrid of the first generation, or kind of takes the best things out of the first generation and the best practices, or leverages all the use cases of the current generation. So but the difference is, obviously, it kicks back a lot of incentives to the users who contribute or participate in it. You could also think of, a much more simpler definition would be that the control and ownership is decentralized. Technically, nobody owns the network. And also, the people who contribute to the ecosystem are heavily incentivized, especially the users. So that's how you could think of Web3. Another word for that is blockchain, right? So, but people often kind of misinterpret currencies which are on the blockchain, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, to the use cases of blockchain. So yeah, you could think of blockchain as Web3.
Okay, so what's the future like, in terms of blockchain in Sri Lanka?
Apart from concerns like regulatory and compliance, I really think there are a lot of use cases for companies, right? So you could think of, you could compare wood and steel. So you could think of Web2 as wood and Web3 as steel, right? So you could use both to build a house, but obviously if even you use steel, it's much more robust and it lasts for long. So with Web3, you would technically not say that you're going to use Web3 in the future, because it's technically technology. You'll be using Web3 technology to build new use cases or enhance the existing use cases. For example, loyalty, fashion, supply chain. We could probably deep dive into some use cases, I suppose, later.
Okay, interesting. So you mentioned that this could be used in the fashion industry as well.
Yeah.
So if you could, in a layman's point of view, explain how can this be facilitated into different industries?
Right. Yeah, for sure. So let me just give you a stat, right? So the fashion industry generates about $1 trillion in dollars. So the NFT fashion industry right now is about 0.1% of that. But some of the brands that use NFTs right now are like Nike, Adidas, and so on and so forth. The best way to think about it is, of course, there are multiple use cases. One of them is, one of the ways to think about it is, we see a natural progression of goods transactions, all of them moving towards digital. So obviously you saw that with currencies, right? So we use the phone to pay. I mean, at least most of the guys use it. So especially overseas, you kind of see that happening quite often. And right now, we are using networks such as Bitcoin and virtual wallets and things like that. So we do see clothing also moving towards digital. One of the reasons is because of ease of use. So you could go anywhere and you could wear a digital cloth, and then you could show it off much faster. And also, it saves a lot of production. I mean, from an environmental point of view. We see Nike doing that for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who are the future generations. They're always on the phone. They use platforms such as Roblox, Fortnite, to play games and to speak with each other, interact. So that's kind of their way of socializing. So they want to obviously express themselves, right? So they need clothes, digital clothes. So that's one of the use cases. So the other one is, you could think about luxurious brands wanting to trace their material sources. So you could use blockchain. You could use blockchain to record all of these things and then also see how it's moving from one hand to another. And also for users, they could also see, who is the owner of this, and then who is it transferred to. So you could see all of those use cases are obviously in fashion. But there are other use cases, like I said, loyalty, right? There was a research done by Boston Consultant Group. They say users are not happy with just financial incentives when they opt in to a loyalty program. They want more. I think that's primarily because of this emergence of user-centric economies. You could think about micro engagements not being rewarded. For example, say I follow someone's brand on social media, but that's kind of an advocacy, right? So, my friends see it, and then you probably like the post of the brand, but what are we getting in return?
Nothing.
Virtually nothing, right? So, blockchain could technically automate all of these or encode a code which would incentivize people not just to participate but also to be rewarded for that.
Right.
So we call it micro engagements being incentivized with micro benefits, and these points don't expire. So just take my example. So I moved to Dubai, and then say I opt in to a loyalty program, and I'm following on social media, and I'm visiting the stores and then purchasing things, right? So, there are different types of engagement in this journey. So from, micro engagements to larger engagements like purchases. So I get points for all of these things, and then I leave Dubai. So what happens to all my points? Nothing. So I could, because the fact that I have put a lot of effort, I could transfer these points or transfer this membership or loyalty to someone else. So those kind of things can be facilitated, right? The other thing is, you could also bring users for decision making. For example, blockchain is a very good example for voting systems. So you could see how someone is interacting with your brand. And you could, obviously these are all transparent, and you could trace them. That's the power of blockchain. You could, I would say, trace all of these and see who are the most loyal customers, and you can bring them to your decision-making ecosystem, or you can give them rights for decision-making. So, like I said, some of these things obviously can be done with Web 2, but with blockchain, with transparency, security, and all of those intact.
And it's convenient as well. I mean, it's easy.
Yeah. So that's the other thing, right? So with smart contracts, smart contracts are like, ways to automate things and enforce security so that you could eliminate the intermediaries.
So it's more reliable.
It's more reliable, right? So, I mean, that's one of the things the financial or the current financial system is afraid of: traditional finance being replaced with something new. Obviously, that's probably one of the reasons most of the people don't want to speak about it. At least the gatekeepers don't want to speak about it. But I think that's where we are heading.
Exactly. So can we call this like the evolution of the internet as well?
Yeah, most definitely. So I think that's how the Web3 name was stemmed. Some call it Web 2.5 because you're using best of both worlds. But yeah, for sure.
Right, so we'll be back with more, but for the moment we're going to take a short break in music and we'll be continuing this conversation right after. You're listening to Radio Sri Lanka. Well, it's precisely 7:30, and we are in conversation with Shakeeb Nazeer, and we're talking about blockchain and its the evolution of internet and how this could be put into practical use is what we are discussing on. So we spoke about how blockchain could be very useful in the fashion industry, but while the song was on, we were talking about how it could also help with the Gen Z and all of them to get shares in terms of real estate as well, because now when we speak of real estate, it's big money. But blockchain could make it easier, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, unless, of course, you come with generational wealth, it's a bit difficult for us to purchase or for the future generations to purchase real estate because it's not accessible. There's a concept called fractional ownership, which is not pretty new, but obviously blockchain enhances these kind of use cases. You could technically put the ownership of the property on blockchain because blockchain you can store information, right? And it's decentralized, so which means there are a lot of you would say millions of participants securing the blockchain, and what they get in return for that is obviously a currency that's used by the blockchain. So regardless, what happens is that when you put information in the blockchain, you could also, using smart contracts, you could enforce ownership. So for example, you could fractionalize the real estate and you could make it accessible to people who cannot afford usually, and as the price appreciates, their share of ownership appreciates as well.
So when necessary, they could sell it off to somebody else.
Yeah, for sure. So it's just like exchanging stocks, right? So
right.
Or financial assets for that matter. So you could do that. You could fractionalize anything. You could even fractionalize art. If it's an expensive piece of art, and if there's a bunch of people who are interested in it, it creates a lot of demand for that. So fractionalizing ownership is one of the biggest use cases, I would say, in the near term.
Interesting, because now there's also how apart from purchasing real estate or shares or transferring ownership, there's also an advantage for people like artists
who, for sure.
Find it very hard to get what they're supposed to get in terms of music or, ownership of whatever they produce. So blockchain comes in handy for this as well, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of artists benefited in the last cycle. So what happens is that when a technology is new, it's considered as speculative, right? So that was the case with internet during the internet bubble. But the real use cases are obviously emerging now. So one of them is artists being rewarded to be able to showcase their art directly to the user without any intermediaries, again using smart contracts, and then also being able to earn royalties from it. So there are popular marketplaces like OpenSea, Rarible, and few others like Magic Kitten and few others, right? So a lot of artists, at least overseas, have been using these marketplaces to showcase their work, and then using basic economics to sell their assets. So some of them being able to make millions of it, right? Millions of dollars. And then, when their art or music gets popular and as it trades hands, there's a percentage of royalties that's been encoded in their work that they receive as royalties. So I think even big brands do it now, like Nike, Starbucks, Adidas. You see a lot of brands doing it, but obviously this is a great opportunity for the artists.
Exactly, and you spoke of all the transparency which is inside this, but let's also talk about the legal side of this.
Yeah. So we are looking at implementing blockchain for a while. So it's not that been easy, obviously because of lack of examples, at least from a regional point of view. But right now we've got a clear blueprint because Dubai has been robust with their at least their regulations, right? So it's also one of the first countries in the world to regulate virtual assets. They have they have an extensive rule book. You also want to comply with these things while being flexible and making sure you don't compromise on user experience. So that's what they have done. Obviously, when you use blockchain, you're transferring not just assets, also you can transfer currencies. So things like anti-money laundering or doing a KYC or getting to know the customer, those kind of things are important to be placed so that you don't accept assets or transfer assets to non-regulated users or networks. So I think those are the most important things from a security or compliance point of view. But I think everything else works like Web 2.
Interesting. And you spoke about how this is being implemented in the UAE. So what does it look like for Sri Lanka, and any steps taken with regards to that?
I think there are a lot of good developers who are already working on interesting tech, but unfortunately, you don't see much of the companies wanting to adopt or I would say it's not even a risk per se. I think take those initiatives to implement blockchain. I think it's also because of lack of knowledge. That's also one of the reasons I wanted to speak about this, because I think it's very important that people, enlighten decision makers and gatekeepers, obviously, to use blockchain. So there was a time, I think about 4 years ago, that I said, we should, as a country, we should invest in Bitcoin. When it was about 17 or 16,000. It's now at 63,000. Even though it's volatile, because that's what speculative assets are, right? But the problem is that usually these things correlate with financial incentives. So when the financial incentives are high, people try to invest. But I think we should think the other way around. So when the financial incentives are low, usually it's much, I would say, reasonable to invest in it, because it's not that expensive. It's not the space is not congested. You could start building and then reap benefits. When the cycles kick in. So, like I said, real estate, supply chain, all of these things. People in digitization could learn from it. Senior decision makers could learn from it. We spoke about loyalty. We spoke about real estate. It just needs an orientation or a innovative orientation towards things, and also being user centric is important. I think a lot of companies, or at least decision makers, are usually incentivized towards profits and revenue, but obviously when you think long term and when you think about users, it's easier to sustain those things.
Exactly. So we've come towards the final few minutes of the show as well, Shakeeb. So you did speak about how this could be really, really useful for artists, for, various, also people who are owning companies for the country per se. So there are pros and cons in everything.
Yeah.
So let's also highlight the ups and downs of this.
Yeah, for sure. So user experience is, still a bit of a concern, I would say, because it's not that easy to implement. Compared to 4 or 5 years ago, it's much easier because a lot of companies are innovating to make the user experience seamless. You could think of, username and password being someone's identity in the blockchain, right? But the way it's interpreted is a bit different because you want to secure the network. So if the securing part is easy, then usually it could be easily compromised. But that's what makes blockchain more robust. But I think a lot of people are figuring out how to make it accessible to a non-digital audience. Because we should still consider those audience as a huge part of
it was the same case when credit cards were introduced.
Yeah, exactly. So, or like my parents trying to figure out how to use the internet, right? So user experience is one of the biggest challenges. And you pointed out regulations, right? So navigating the regulatory framework is important, and I think obviously Sri Lanka needs to set a robust compliance and regulatory framework, or at least follow the frameworks that have been set by established networks, right? So I think those two are the most important things to figure out, but everything else I think will come on its own.
Exactly. So with that, I guess we have a clear idea as to what blockchain is and how this could be really useful, and how as a nation we should adopt to this, and also spreading awareness is also a vital, it's of importance, and that's what we are doing right now.
Yeah, for sure.
So hopefully things will kind of fall into place. Everything takes time. So, it takes time to adopt to a certain kind of thing. And I think even to adopt to this, we need to have the platform and we need to also have the regulations sorted so that things can fall into place. So thank you so much for giving us a very good insight into blockchain.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's a pleasure to be able to speak about it.
Thank you, Shakeeb, and have yourself a safe journey back.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks for the listeners to listening about Web3.
Thank you very much once again. With that, it's time for us to wind up the coffee hour, and it's back to Soundi for the next 15 minutes or so.